This is Bob Main from the Handgun World podcast, reminding you that this podcast is a member of the Self-Defense Radio Network. Check out all the great podcasts at selfdefenseradio.net.
Bringing you law, gospel, and guns. Welcome to Armed Lutheran Radio.
Hi folks, Lloyd Bailey here, the Armed Lutheran. Welcome to episode 95. Here on Armed Lutheran Radio, we're talking about guns, hunting, competition, and the natural right of self-defense, and what God's Word says about the issues surrounding gun rights and gun ownership. This episode is brought to you by Cook's Holsters, American-made custom Kydex holsters with a lifetime warranty and a 100% satisfaction guarantee. CooksHolsters.com. Thank you for making Armed Lutheran Radio a part of your week. We're happy to have you listening, and if you like what you hear, share with your friends. We would really appreciate spreading the word to those in your church, those in your circle of friends. Let them know that you enjoy what you hear here on Armed Lutheran Radio. It's been a tough week here in Texas, as you can imagine. Last Sunday was All Saints Sunday, and that day is the festival in the Christian church where we remember the martyrs and the saints who've died in the faith. And ironically, on that day, 26 saints from the First Baptist Church of Sutherland Springs, Texas, departed this vale of tears in the most horrible way imaginable. Evil entered the sanctuary that morning, armed with a semi-automatic rifle, dressed in black tactical gear, and went systematically row by row and executed half of the congregation. The anti-gun left immediately seized on that attack, as they always do, to push gun control. They pretended to care about the dead and wounded Christians, whom on any other day they would be ridiculing and making fun of. Others couldn't help themselves and continued their mockery even as the bodies were still lying unidentified in that chapel. CNN, the leftist Twitterverse, left-wing rags like Slate and the Huffington Post and Salon and a handful of B-list celebrities sneered and made fun of the Christians in that church. The victims, they said, had the prayers shot right out of them. A lot of good their prayers were doing. Their faith was worthless, because God allowed them to be killed. Others said prayers are worthless unless you're praying for gun control. Even the unbelievers in the gun community couldn't contain their nastiness. There was a question posted on The Truth About Guns, which inevitably brought out the ugly atheists who love guns, but just can't pass up the opportunity to spew their hate for God and for Christians. A member of my own IDPA shooting club joked that these things don't happen in Australia because they must pray more or be closer to God. And he said that we needed to ban AR-15s. Christians are the only people in America that it's still acceptable to ridicule and mock, even as we're targeted for slaughter. Dianne Feinstein, the same woman who had attacked a judicial nominee and her Christian faith in a Senate hearing, now seems to care about the fate of Christians in Texas. But only if their death furthers her dream of banning guns. The sleepy town of Sutherland Springs is less than 400 people. Until last Sunday, it was the kind of place where people left their doors unlocked, their windows open at night. It's where everybody knows their neighbors. Nobody expected something like this to happen in Sutherland Springs, and yet it did. Consider the words of Christ from Matthew chapter 5, the Beatitudes. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. So where's the comfort? As half the congregation of this Texas church lies dead, where's the comfort? The Christian finds comfort in the knowledge that this world isn't our home, that by grace through faith, we're promised a life without suffering, without pain or disease or hatred or fear or persecution, not in this life, but in the next. That though these good people died such an awful death, Christ has won for us salvation through his death on the cross. Jesus promised suffering and pain and persecution in this life because of our faith, not in spite of it. You know, the world measures success. Its highest aspiration is happiness without suffering, without trouble or pain. We don't want to be poor or hungry or spoken ill of or treated unjustly. We don't want to suffer violent death. The world measures success by avoiding those things. And prosperity preachers will even tell you that if you live a certain way, if you do certain things, if you believe certain things, God will reward you with health and riches and contentment. But Jesus, in the Sermon on the Mount, turns that whole way of thinking upside down. Jesus tells us that in this world, there's going to be sorrow, there's going to be pain, there's violence and injustice. And he calls blessed those who suffer and mourn. Later he says, "Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." You know, Paul says in 2 Timothy that all those who desire to live a godly life in Christ will be persecuted. For some, that persecution comes at the end of a sword. For others, it's just being mocked or ridiculed. For others, it's being sued and having their businesses destroyed for standing up for their beliefs. For others, it's dying a horrible death at the hands of an angry atheist. But wait, even non-believers suffer, right? That's true. But the distinction is in the phrase, "for righteousness' sake." Martin Luther put it like this: "The devil and wicked people also suffer persecution. Rascals often get into each other's hair, and there's no love lost between them. So one murderer persecutes another, and the Turk battles against the Tartar, but this does not make them blessed." This statement only applies to those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake. So who cares if a crazy prince or foolish emperor fumes in his rage and threatens me with sword, fire, or the gallows? As long as my Christ is talking dearly to me, comforting me with the promises that I am blessed, that I am right with God in heaven. Those who persecute you, those who mock you, those who abuse you, in the end they're going to die. And God, who calls you blessed, who creates all things, will still be there. And so will you. That's the comfort. That's the comfort of the gospel in these terrible times. So we should be willing to suffer all this world can do, everything it can throw at us, because we've got the certain comfort of God's promise of life eternal. Let me finish by paraphrasing Luther one more time. Say goodbye to the world and to all those who harm us in the name of their Lord, the devil. Their outcome will not be the one they want. They take pleasure in our misfortune and do us much harm. We should take heart, for we shall live to see that at the last day they will howl and weep when we are comforted and happy. Please keep the people of Sutherland Springs, Texas, the victims and their families, and all who suffer for righteousness' sake in your thoughts and prayers. We've got a Ballistic Minute from Sergeant Bill today, and a special guest, Dr. John Edeen from Doctors for Responsible Gun Ownership. Mia gets us started next. You're listening to Armed Lutheran Radio on the Self-Defense Radio Network.
The Self-Defense Gun Stories podcast is for people who are thinking of getting a gun, and for those who already own one. Each week we invite a firearms instructor to discuss the news. At Self-Defense Gun Stories, we study responsible gun owners who protected themselves and the people they love. Were these gun owners lucky, or were they properly trained and prepared? What would you do if you were in their shoes? What should you do? Come listen at selfdefensegunstories.com.
The percentage of women who own guns is growing. American women are more knowledgeable and better equipped to defend themselves than ever before. So, why is it that every time I go to a gun shop, I feel like they're talking down to me? Like, hey little lady, let me show you what you need. It's like all they want to do is sell me a pink gun. If you're tired of feeling that too, visit Guns for Gals, a specialty firearms boutique designed to empower women with information about firearm safety and to equip them with the means to protect themselves. The owners go out of their way to find products specifically for women, and they actually listen and ask questions to help you find the right products to meet your needs. If they wouldn't own it themselves, they won't sell it. Guns for Gals is located at 2035 Central Circle, Suite 108 in McKinney, Texas. Open Monday 1 to 6 and Tuesday through Thursday 11 to 7. And on weekends, you can find them at a gun show near you. Or shop online at www.gunsforgals.com. Guns for Gals, more than just a gun shop. It's how gun shopping should be.
Up next, it's Mia's Motivations with Mia Anstine.
Hey guys, it's Mia. I'm happy to be visiting with you again. It is hunting season in Colorado, and so you can guess where I have been. I have been up in the mountains hunting away and helping friends and all this good stuff. And so I'm sorry that I missed you a couple of weeks, but I'm back in cell service and able to send in some messages and recordings to Lloyd. So I hope that you're excited too. But with hunting season, all kinds of people always ask me for hunting tips for hunting big game or elk in Colorado in the high country. And the biggest tip I always tell people is get in shape. And this is a big deal because if you're from sea level or 3,000 or 1,000 feet or something like that, and you come to the mountains of Colorado and you end up hunting at maybe 9,000, 10,000, or 12,000 feet, it is a big deal. And altitude sickness is a real thing, and you can really get sick from it. You can end up in the hospital from it. And so you definitely have to get in shape. Another tip that I give people, I've got friends that do this every year, is try to arrive early. Get to as close to the elevation where you're going to be hunting, get there a few days early so that you can allow your body to acclimate. Another big tip for hunting in the high country is nutrition. You have to have a lot of protein and a lot of hydration. You need water, something that I really, really like, and I'm not sponsored by them or anything else. I have just found that I really like Wilderness Athlete. It's a nutrition supplement, and their Hydrate and Recover is just excellent. It's great stuff. If you get leg cramps and stuff, really helps with that. So nutrition and exercise and getting there early, those are really key big points. If you ever want extra tips on hunting in the high country, you can follow me on my website, my blog. It's miaanstine.com, and you can follow me there or on social media outlets, and also on my YouTube. I've been sharing actually some adventures there with like video blogs lately, so hopefully you guys are enjoying those. Until next time, have a great one. Bye, friends.
You can read more from Mia and watch her YouTube videos at miaanstine.com.
For the reloaders in the audience, have you ever ordered reloading supplies online? Well, if so, who do you call when you need help, or if you need something special? Will they give you a price that includes hazmat and shipping? Will they promise to beat their competitors' prices, including shipping? And when you call, do you talk to a customer service rep, or can you talk to the owner himself? Well, if you'd prefer a personal touch and great customer service, talk to my friend Jim Swindle at U.S. Reloading Supply. It's a family-owned business that focuses on helping shooters get get all the components they need at the very best prices. They carry all the name brands. If you've got a special order or large quantities, ask them for a quote and they will help you find what you need at a great price. Use the promo code Lutheran2017 and save 10% off your order and get free shipping on orders over $50. Check them out online at usreloadingsupply.com or call them today, 941-451-7357. US Reloading Supply. Tell them the Armed Lutheran sent you.
Time now for another Ballistic Minute with Sergeant Bill Silvia.
I'm Sergeant Bill. This is your Ballistic Minute. Today I'm going to do a quick review on a shotgun I recently picked up. It's an Armscor M5 pump shotgun. Alright, so Armscor shotgun, made in the Philippines. It's a 870 copy. It's a 12 gauge pump shotgun with 18.5-inch barrel. It's got a black plastic shoulder stock, nickel plated, kind of a matte finish to it. It has a steel receiver, unlike most of the Remington 870s, which have an aluminum receiver. The steel receiver makes it a little bit heavier of a gun. It's got a bead sight on it and just kind of a flat top rear notch on the back, like a typical pump action shotgun. And I think the plug holds 5 12 gauge shells, and it is a 12 gauge. So I got this online, and I was looking for a shotgun for, to either keep in my car or home defense or something like that. I already have a Mossberg, which is really nice, but I saw this one in an ad for an online gun place. I don't even remember where I got it, but the price was right. It was right under $200, and I thought, for $200, let's try it out. When I got it, as most guns from the Philippines are, it was in a plastic bag and just slathered in oil. It wasn't Cosmoline, but oil. So after kind of wiping it down, kind of got to looking at it, the pump on it, the action is one of the smoothest pump actions I've ever felt. It does have double action bars, but usually the test of a shotgun is you make sure it's empty and you put the pump all the way up and you hold the gun straight up and down. You pull the trigger and then you wait to see if the pump comes down, or you wiggle the gun a little bit or kind of shake it up and down to see if the pump will come down and actuate itself. This one did it easily. The action on it's amazingly smooth. Took it out to the range and put slugs through it and birdshot through it and buckshot through it. Man, it shoots great. And the nickel-plated matte type finish that's on it is actually really nice. It's kind of blingy, kind of a silver shotgun, but it's a really good finish because it's matte. It doesn't show a lot of wear, and I have already kind of beat it up a little bit, but you can't really tell unless you really look at it closely. And it shoots good, so for the price, it's a pretty good deal. So if you can find an Armscor M5 12-gauge shotgun, I say check it out. This has been your Ballistic Minute with Sergeant Bill.
Sergeant Bill Silvia is a 15-year veteran of the Dallas Police Department and master-class competitive shooter. You can watch Sergeant Bill's shooting videos at armedlutheran.us/Sergeant Bill.
Having a good holster is absolutely critical if you're going to carry a firearm for self-defense. If you need a quality holster, let me recommend Cook's Holsters. I've found Cook's Holsters when I bought an IWB holster to write a review. I liked that holster from Cook's Holsters so much that I applied to become an official Cook's Holsters dealer. Cook's Holsters are American-made, custom-molded to fit your firearm. The advantage of Kydex is that it holds its shape. It doesn't lose retention. It won't wear on the finish of your firearm the way leather will. They're available for hundreds of gun models styles, dozens of color combinations and different printed patterns. They're great for concealed carry, for range work. They come with a lifetime warranty against defects and a 100% satisfaction guarantee. Check them out today, www.cooksholsters.com. Use the promo code ARMEDPODCAST to save 10% off of your order, and make sure you've got a quality holster. Go to cooksholsters.com today. Welcome back. Today's guest is a practicing pediatric orthopedic surgeon in San Antonio, Texas, graduate of Columbia University's College of Physicians and Surgeons, and he's been in practice for over 30 years, and he is the membership director of Doctors for Responsible Gun Ownership, and he's a friend of the show. Dr. John Edeen, welcome to Armed Lutheran Radio.
Hey, it's my pleasure to be here. I'm happy to connect with your audience and maybe give them some information that they may not know about.
Well, I am honored to have you here. It was great to finally meet you at the Gun Rights Policy Conference. Let's get started by just sort of giving a little bit of an introduction to you, a little bit of background. For most gun people, there's a reason or a point in your life where you become a gun owner or a gun guy or a gun gal. You either grew up around guns, or at some point some event happens that made you concerned about your personal safety, or you just took it up as a hobby. What made you become? How did you become a gun guy?
Well, it was in 1992, the Rodney King riots. I was stationed at Oakland Naval Hospital. I was doing my orthopedic residency, and they had the Oakland riots. A good friend of mine, we used to play racquetball together, and he dislocated his kneecap, and we couldn't play anymore, so he took me to the range and we did a little shooting. And after the riot, I said, I think I need to get me one of those, firearm things. So I bought myself a Beretta 92 because, that's what the Navy was using in those days. So I figured I might as well get what they were using. And so that's how I started. And then I became, started getting more and more guns. When I moved to Jacksonville Naval Hospital after I finished my training, I joined a gun club, and I actually took up a little, skeet shooting and did a little hunting, duck hunting. But as, things progress, how we get to be collectors. I bought a revolver, and I bought a SIG, 45, and you know how things go. And next thing you know, you have lots and lots of nice toys. But I didn't get into the Second Amendment thing really till about 2013. And, here I am in Texas, and I started to listen to a few podcasts. I listened to Gun for Hire Radio. Since I grew up in New Jersey, those are kind of the hometown guys. And so I was listening to that, and I was listening to Armed American Radio with this guy named Mark Walters, and then he was doing these things where he'd travel around the country to the Gander Mountain places that had ranges, and they would have the firearms companies bring guns for you to shoot, and they would supply the ammo. And this is during that ammo shortage, and they had a bunch of ammo. So I said, well, heck, I'm going to go to that. And my orthopedic partner and I hopped in the car and drove from San Antonio to just north of Houston. And I met Mark there, and he and I spent probably 4 hours talking about gun stuff and just kind of Second Amendment things. And I was waiting for Rob Pincus to show up because I wanted to take, combat focused shooting. I wanted to chat with him a little bit, and he didn't get there till 2 p.m. So I was there from 9 till about 2 or 3, minus a little shooting and a lunch break. Mark and I just sat and talked. And so then he invited me to go to the NRA meeting, which was in Houston that year. So I said, well, I'll go. And at the NRA meeting, he says, you ought to come to Gun Rights Policy Conference, because that was also in Houston a few months later. And so I went to the Gun Rights Policy Conference, and my eyeballs just dropped out of my head, and it was pretty impressive. And I met Dr. Timothy Wheeler, who's the founder of Doctors for Responsible Gun Ownership. Because at that point, I was struggling with the gun-free zone in the hospital issue. I was trying to figure out how we can get that undone. And so I talked with him, and he kind of helped me. I was on a committee for our county medical board, and I put in a resolution to try to at least come position about gun-free zones in general, and in hospitals in particular. And of course, being the typical, doctor organization, they voted it down 22-2. I only had 2 supporters. I mean, that's just the way it is. Yeah. So I was a little bit disappointed, but Tim said, "Don't worry." He says, "When I first started doing this is the same kind of stuff that I ran into too." Of course, Tim was in California, so it's really, you'd expect it to be different in Texas, but it's not, because there's a definite bias against Second Amendment rights in the mainstream medical community, as far as the big organizations, the AMA and the American College of Surgeons. And you would think that we would know better, but unfortunately, the not the education, but the indoctrination, I guess, is probably a better way of putting it, is pretty strong in the medical community. So after a few years, Tim decided he wanted to step down, or at least to back off a little bit. So he been in contact with several of the guys in DRGO, and so he passed on the membership duties to. I volunteer for the membership duties. There's a guy that does the editing. There's another guy that now is the project director who runs things, and then we have a youth outreach. And those are, and you met them probably during the gun rights policy conference. And so they're kind of the leadership. And then we have, hundreds and hundreds of doctors and not doctors even. So, because you don't have to be a doctor to be part of DRGO. Certainly we appreciate doctors and their training and their perspective, but we have attorneys, we have just regular Joes, and you can go to drgo.us. That's our website, and you can see what we do. There's a lot of information there. We talk about, that firearms violence is not a public health issue, and what to do when your doctor asks you if you own a gun, things like that. Plus right. More, lots more.
Well, you mentioned the bias among in the medical community. In the wake of these 2 most recent mass shootings, of course, Sutherland Springs, which is right down the road from you, and Las Vegas a few weeks back, I've been involved in a number of these conversations with people, and one most recently with a doctor who is talking about how the law prohibits the government from doing research into gun violence because gun violence is a health issue, and the NRA is preventing the government from doing all this dispassionate research that the government is great at doing, and we just need to lift this prohibition. But Doctors for Responsible Gun Ownership were instrumental in preventing advocacy-based research at the CDC. Can you give us a little bit of a background on, so people understand exactly what happened and what's prohibited, and what the government is still capable of doing in regards to research?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, there is no prohibition against, research against, with gun violence. The prohibition is advocacy research. In other words, let's start out with a conclusion: guns are bad. Okay, let's write a paper. Let's skew our data. And this is what was going on in 1990, in the early 1990s, when Tim Wheeler actually started Doctors for Responsible Gun Ownership. But they were putting out papers that were biased and skewed so that it came up with the answer that they wanted. So, I don't think any of us are against legitimate research. Research where you have a theory, you either prove or disprove the theory using evidence. Right. That's science. This other stuff is social engineering, and that's what we were against. And of course, Dr. Wheeler and several other members of Doctors for Responsible Gun Ownership testified in front of Congress, and that's where we got the Dickey Amendment, and that's how things were defunded. The other thing is they say, well, there's no research being done in gun violence. That's not true. When they talk about the numbers that there's less research, they're talking about the percentage based on the entire total of medical publications. Medical publications have exploded over the last 20 years, and gun violence research has somewhat kept up, but it's, the numbers are bigger, but it's not the same percentage of the overall.
Gotcha.
So yes, there's more gun violence research being done. It's just not to the same percentage of the total as it was, 20 years ago. And the other thing is, there's a lot of funding for research. The Bloomberg School of Public Health. Okay.
Right.
Michael Bloomberg's got pretty dang deep pockets, doesn't he?
Yes,
and he
does. Gives
millions and millions and millions of dollars to fund research through these types of organizations. He educated through the Columbia School of Journalism a bunch of journalists on how to cover gun violence stories using his big money. And there were no Second Amendment positive. I think there were two people that had not a bias. I think one was Ham. What's her name?
Mary Catherine Ham.
Mary Catherine Ham. And then the other one, I think, was David Kopel. And out of probably 20 or 30 speakers, those were the only two that even had a neutral or positive perspective on Second Amendment stuff. The rest of it was, trying to cut down Second Amendment rights. This is how we're going to bias our coverage. And of course, we see it every day in the news. It's there every day.
And speaking of bias, you've recently been embroiled in a bit of a back and forth with the Dallas newspaper, and as the chief of staff emeritus at Scottish Rite Hospital, another pediatric surgeon like yourself, wrote an anti-gun piece recently, and you've been chomping at the bit to respond to it, but the media just doesn't seem to want to hear your side.
No, they don't. This was an opinion piece done by Dr. John Anthony Herring. He goes by Tony Herring. He's been in pediatric orthopedics for over 40 years. He's a giant in the pediatric orthopedic community, but I just don't understand how he can even think he can get away with putting something like this out that has absolutely no facts in it. It has a Hollywood conjecture, and it has the Hollywood bias that in it. Talks about Australian law, how that works so well, but all you have to do is read what John Lott has to say. You read his books and you go, well, no, he totally debunked all that stuff. You were at Gun Rights Policy Conference. He actually had that graph up where he had to show the rate of crime was going down at a certain rate before the confiscation, and then after the confiscation, it actually flattened out some. It was still going down, but at a less steep rate. And if you think about it, if they confiscated 1 million firearms and it was the firearms that was the problem, that crime rate should have just bottomed out. And then over the years, as the numbers of firearms grew, up until 2010 is when it reached the same level as it was in 1996 or 1997. And then now there's even more firearms in Australia. That crime rate should go way, way up, and it hasn't. It's continued to go down to some degree. And it parallels what's going on in New Zealand, which is the island next door. There's a lot of picking and choosing of your data.
Yep, and the interesting parallel to the trends in the U.S., where at the same time they're banning guns and confiscating firearms, our firearms ownership rate is going up, and yet the decline in violence, in the rate of violence in the U.S. is sort of tracking along the same line and declining a little more steeply.
Right. So this more guns equals more crime business is not true.
Exactly.
People think, it would make sense that more guns equals more crime. No. More guns in the hands of good people means less crime, because good people are not inclined to use their guns to kill people. They're only there for defensive purposes. You and I, our guns aren't going to go out and go kill somebody. Mm-hmm. It's not the gun. It's the heart of the person who's wielding the weapon. And same thing with suicide. They talk about all these firearms deaths where 2/3 of them are suicides. Well, yeah. So if you have an efficient tool to do something, you're going to use it. But if you live in a country where that tool is taken away, you will find other ways, like Japan. They throw themselves in front of trains, or commit
Exactly.
seppuku. cut their own guts out, or whatever, hang themselves, or I think there's a forest at the foot of Mount Fuji where people commit suicide. It's a ritual suicide place. So so here we are. We're looking at all this, all this stuff that they're talking about that's absolutely meaningless. But still that's their argument, and that's why they want to try to disarm us. Or that's how they want to try to disarm us. We know why they want to disarm us.
Yeah, exactly. Most recently, Doctors for Responsible Gun Ownership was providing supporting information for the Hearing Protection Act, which has now been folded into the SHARE Act, which is now effectively dead thanks to these two mass shootings and squeamish Republicans in Congress. Can you give us a little bit of why is the involvement of DRGO important in this effort to deregulate silencers? And why is this not an issue that people need to be really scared and freaked out about?
Right. Well, first of all, we have a position paper on our website, drgo.us, that actually gives the scientific evidence why suppressors are beneficial to shooters. Mm-hmm. It's written by 4 ear, nose, and throat surgeons, one of which is, of course, Timothy Wheeler, who's an ear, nose, and throat surgeon. But there's also 2 other guys who are neuro-otologists who deal with the neural aspects of hearing. So these are the subject matter experts. The other side doesn't have they haven't done anything like this. They talk about the hair cells and the actual physiology of of hearing, and how the loud sound actually damages these hair cells, which are the sensory organs in your inner ear. And that one exposure to over 140 decibels can cause permanent, irreversible hearing loss. Mm-hmm. And we talk about, the VA, the one of the most costly aspects of VA disability is hearing loss in the military, because guys are running machine guns and all this kind of stuff without hearing protection, and of course they lost their hearing. And even just the general population, 15% of adults age 18 and over have some kind of hearing loss. And so it's a problem. And we know that a suppressor will decrease the muzzle blast and the actual decibel level of the sound by approximately 30 decibels. And that's for everybody around, not just, like, for instance, you say, well, earplugs and, we have all that stuff. Yeah, well, I've had 2 noise exposures in the last 3 months. One was with rifles and one was with handguns. One was at that class we were in last weekend. Mm-hmm. And my earplug wasn't in quite tight enough, and the guy next to me shot his pistol, and I put my shoulder into my ear to try to dampen the sound because it hurt. The other one was with a rifle at an Appleseed event that I was at, and I had one plug in one ear, but I had taken one out to talk, to do some instructing, and I had forgotten to put it back in, and the woman next to me shot an AR-15. My ear is still ringing from that, and that's 3 months ago. So, that's 170 decibels of noise, or 180 decibels. That's devastating to your hearing. And so with a suppressor on, if there was a suppressor on every rifle there, we could have stood there and had a nice conversation and not had any acute hearing loss. Probably still would be a good idea to wear some type of hearing protection, even with suppressors, because of the cumulative effect of multiple, lower exposures. If you're getting 130 decibels multiple times, you can still get hearing damage from that. So this is all the kind of stuff that's in this white paper. It talks about that it's not an issue with criminals, because criminals don't put suppressors on their guns because they can't hide them. You got a 6-inch tube sitting off the end of your pistol. It's pretty hard to hide that under your coat. And exactly. So it's not used in crime, and it's not Hollywood where it goes, pit, pit, pit. It's not a little silent. It's a jackhammer instead of a firecracker. Okay, that's the difference. So I mean, we debunk the Hollywood BS.
And that's really important, because the other side has none of this kind of expert information. They only have their understanding of how silencers, quote unquote, silencers work based on Hollywood, and their fear of, oh my goodness, we won't be able to hear it when people are committing crimes. but they don't have any research to back it up. Theirs is all, as with all the gun arguments, the anti side is all based on fear, and our side is all based in fact.
Right. It's all about emotion and feelings. And you have to remember, in a Hollywood movie, the guy that makes the noise is a Foley artist.
Exactly.
It's not what happens on the set. It's a guy who actually adds the sound in after the production is done, and it's in the after production that they put the sounds in. So that's why you get this Hollywood business. It has absolutely nothing to do with reality. It's fantasy. And that's what Hollywood sells, and they sell a message. They sell a fantasy message, which, of course, backs up their political belief system.
We had the day before the Gun Rights Policy Conference, we had an alternative mass media conference, and you were part of a panel during that conference. And you said that the one question that you get most often and that you dislike the most is, what do I tell my doctor if he asks me if I've got guns in the home? So what do we say to if a doctor asks us if we've got guns in the home? I'm just kidding. I'm not going to ask you that question.
This is a D-rated show, so I won't tell you what I really would want to say. But
well, I was going to use that to segue into a new project that DRGO has started up, I think, just in September, right? Just a couple of months ago, 2adoc.com.
Right. We're just starting to get it off the ground. Right now, what we're doing is we're gathering names of 2A friendly physicians who want to participate in the program. And so this is all kept very confidential. It's not a searchable website. We keep the data. And once we get a critical mass of provider participants, and we're already collecting names of people who are interested in matching up, we'll send the info out to the people who want to sign up from a patient standpoint, and then we'll try to match doctors in your area. And this has been going on for actually several years, where we get emails to our website saying, "Hey, I'm looking for this kind of doctor in this area. Do you have anybody in your network? Any of your members that are that kind of doctor?" And unfortunately, most of the time, the answer is no, because we have a relatively small number of doctors. But we're trying to put out, and it's not just doctors; it's nurse practitioners and everything else too. Any kind of healthcare, physical therapists, optometrists, the whole nine yards. So what we're trying to do is gather that number of healthcare providers, and then we're going to match them up, and it's all going to be done on a confidential basis, because we don't want Michael Bloomberg's boys harassing doctors, standing out in front of their office. Your doctors are, believes in murdering people. It's a bunch of crap.
And that's it,
frankly. But that's the kind of thing that they would do. So we want to protect our participating healthcare providers from stuff like that, and also we want to maintain patient and physician confidentiality. Certainly, we believe that it's none of anybody else's business what doctor you go see. And but we also want to make sure that if you want a Second Amendment friendly doctor, that we can find you one if we can get it done. I think the farther and the longer this thing goes, the more ability we're going to be able to have to connect people with the type of doctor that they want to get in the region where they're at.
All right, so gun-free zones. This is a topic that I know you're not shy about expressing an opinion on. This is something you've written extensively about. You spoke about this at the Gun Rights Policy Conference. Take a second to kind of lay out your thoughts on gun-free zones, and specifically related to hospitals. Why is this? What is it that motivated you or got you thinking about this topic? You talked about it earlier, that this was something that you had kind of rolling around in your head early on.
Well, I've been a concealed license holder in Texas since 2007. And, I've been trying to do the concealed carry lifestyle thing, where I carry my firearm wherever I can go.
Right.
Right up until the point I got to go into work in a hospital. Then I got to put my gun in my lock case and then get out and walk into the hospital past the 30-06 and 30-07 signs, where, for those of you who are not in Texas, those are the legal signs in Texas that prevent concealed license holders from carrying concealed and or open in a certain location. And these are allowed by Texas law. And there's also, interestingly, when they changed the law a few years ago to reduce the penalties, they didn't do that in hospitals. It's still a Class A misdemeanor. And you can lose your license and you get a fine and jail time and all this kind of stuff. And for me, potentially, it can impact my professional license because I have to maintain a Texas medical license or practice medicine in Texas. So it really does, it's a not an easy decision to make. So, I went around and I talked to my colleagues, the doctors and the nurses and the technicians and stuff. And we talk about this kind of stuff. And I actually took a petition around and I asked them, could we ask the administration to allow concealed handgun license holders and the staff to be able to carry while at work if they so desired? And I had 500 signatures before the administration got wind of what I was doing. And then, I got a phone call from the CEO of the Children's Hospital saying, cease and desist, you're in violation of our anti-solicitation policy.
Uh-huh.
I'm like, what? What anti-solicit? You mean the ones where you buy Girl Scout cookies, that kind of solicitation? And I was also, at this time, I was organizing classes with Ben Brannon and Bob Main for introduction to firearms, handguns.
Right.
And I had, flyers up and stuff. So they were tearing that stuff down. So they didn't want to hear any of this stuff. And it's mostly because of the corporate nature of hospitals. Remember, most of these hospitals are owned by multi-billion-dollar corporations.
Mm-hmm.
The hospital that I work at is owned by HCA, and that's based out of Tennessee. But they have hospitals all over the country. And so the hospital attorneys tell the administrators, look, as long as you put your gun-free zone signs up, you're covered. Right up until the point when there's going to be a terrorist attack or there's going to be a shooting. I mean, there was one up in gun-free zone New York State this past year.
Mm-hmm.
In New York City, rather, up in the Bronx. Guy killed a bunch of people there. Killed the doctor, shot a bunch of other people before he committed suicide with a rifle that he walked into the hospital with under his coat. So anyway, the bottom line is gun-free zone laws don't work. All they do is disarm the good people who don't want to use their firearm, and they make it easy for the bad guy, the evil person, the terrorist, the psychopath, whatever you want to call him, whatever kind of person that is, to go in there and have a free fire zone with nobody to oppose them. We say, well, they got security guards in the hospital. Yeah. Look at your hospital security guards. I bet you 99% of them have a taser or less, maybe pepper spray. I doubt any of them actually have a firearm. And if they do, they're few and far between. Unless you're in a big inner city hospital, they don't have metal detectors. Nobody's getting searched. And there's multiple entrances.
Mm-hmm.
So bad guys can get in and out, no problem. There's history of terrorism against hospitals too.
Oh yeah, and most depending on the size, you mentioned the size of the hospital. Most hospitals that I've been to, once you get past the lobby, you don't see the security anymore. So if you're on the other end of the hospital having surgery, and
right, it's free reign.
Well, you wrote an article for the United States Concealed Carry Association's magazine called "In the Crosshairs: Are Hospitals Targets for Terrorist Attacks?" And we know that groups like ISIS have called on their supporters, their followers here in the U.S., to attack, Americans where we're most vulnerable, where they'll be least likely to have a prepared response or to defend against it. Are hospitals, like you've said, particularly a juicy target for terrorists? Is this something that we as Americans need to be worried about?
Absolutely, we need to be worried about, because first of all, there's large numbers of people. There's a valuable community asset. In a hospital, if you're in a smaller city, let's say, you may only have one or two major hospitals. If they decided to take a car bomb and roll it up to the emergency room and explode it, or a bomb vest on a person after a terrorist attack, they can take out the entire emergency room and make that hospital basically non-functional. And you take out the people because the people are the asset. The equipment can be replaced, but how long does it take to train an emergency room physician?
Right.
Takes a long, and get them 20 to 30 years of experience, because that's what most of the doctors in hospitals are experienced doctors. My colleagues, I've been practicing orthopedics for over 30 years. That kind of experience cannot be replaced, not easily anyway. No. Eventually, you can replace it,
right?
But and then there's the psychological effect on the community when you take out the hospital. Who's going to want to go to the hospital after there's been a terrorist attack there?
Because the hospital is supposed to be this safe place where...
Right, and it's supposed to be a sanctuary, right? Just like the sanctuary of a church, for instance. And despite the fact that Texas law allows people to carry guns in church, not a single person was carrying a gun in that church that day. And I can tell you, next Sunday here in Texas, there's going to be a lot of guns in church. I promise you that. Because Texans may be one thing, but they're not stupid. They learn from their experience, and so I can tell you there's going to be a lot of guns under the Sunday best this Sunday, and hopefully people remember that. The thing is, by law, we are disarmed, not unarmed, disarmed in hospitals, and that's a problem. And so, we tried to go the legislative route, and we've had bills come up and go down, but the bottom line is until we get rid of gun-free zones. Anywhere where there's a gun-free zone, evil's going to seek that out. We look at all these, mass shootings. They all happen in gun-free zones, except for like 2 or 3, according to John Lott.
Right.
And although the church wasn't probably a legislated gun-free zone, it effectively was because nobody was carrying. And the only thing that stopped this guy was the neighbor that showed up with his own rifle and took him on, and thank goodness for him. And it was children and adults and teenagers and everything in between, from the old to the young, without mercy. And so the only person that really is responsible for our safety is us, and we have to be aware that evil is out there. This stuff is going to happen, and it's going to happen again in churches. It may not happen in Texas, because I think Texans are pretty smart. But, you go to, other states, California, New Jersey,
I do too.
Stuff like this is going to start happening there too. There's going to be copycats, because that's just the way it is. The evil mind picks up on that and goes, well, I could do that here too. So, places like that, you're really going to have to watch out. And if it means, having to hire a off-duty police officer or whatever, or have, recruit off-duty police officers to your church and get them in your congregation, so that you have people who can carry in places like that. That's a great thing. If it does happen, having prepositioned first aid supplies in the church, but and just being aware of what's going on. It's a difficult problem, because evil plans this out. These guys plan this stuff out for usually months in advance, if not years. These mass shootings. They pick their opportunity when you are the most vulnerable, when you are not paying attention, when you are not in a place where you're considering, oh, this is a dangerous place, I better carry my gun. No, people go to church. They feel like, well, I'm at church. God probably doesn't want me to bring a gun here. Baloney. Sell your cloak, buy a sword. Remember that one? Yes.
Right.
Okay, that's biblical.
We've talked about that many times.
That's biblical. Right. So you have to, you got to forget about this, this rationalization. We live in a dangerous world, and evil exists. And the sooner that we recognize that evil exists, the sooner that we need to prepare to defend the innocent from evil. And that's our obligation. We have to defend the innocent from evil.
Well, Dr. John Edeen is a board-certified pediatric orthopedic surgeon from San Antonio, Texas. He's the membership director for Doctors for Responsible Gun Ownership, and a tireless advocate for our gun rights, particularly in the fight against gun-free zones. Dr. Edeen, it's been an honor to have you here. Thank you for all that you do. Thank you for everything that all the members of Doctors for Responsible Gun Ownership are doing, and keep up the good work. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure, and I'm happy to put the word out. And just remember, drgo.us is our website, and 2adoc.com if you want to participate as a healthcare provider. And then sooner or later, we're going to start increasing our numbers for our patient referral service, so we can get people connected with the doctors that they want to have, that will not bother them about this business with, do you own a gun or not? So, well, again, thank you so much.
All right, thank you. And that's going to wrap it up for this week. Thank you to my wonderful cast of contributors, Sergeant Bill Sgt and Mia Anstine. Pastor John Bennett and Aaron Israel will be back with us next week, Lord willing. And a special thank you to Dr. John Edeen of Doctors for Responsible Gun Ownership for joining me today. Thank you to our sponsors and to the members of the Reformation Gun Club for supporting the show. Check out the Reformation Gun Club at gunclub.armedlutheran.us for all the benefits. It's just $15.17 per year. Lots of great content there. Thank you for listening, for downloading and subscribing. I hope you'll join me again next week. Until then, keep shooting, keep praying. I'll talk to you next time.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Armed Lutheran Radio. For show notes, be sure to visit our website at www.armedlutheran.us. You can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher Radio, and TuneIn. This podcast is made possible by Cook's Holsters and contributions from listeners like you.